Do we have a problem here? Let's check it in. Well, welcome, Ray. I want to go back and I want to find out where a very young Ray Evans started his musical career. Ray Evans, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks, Wendy. Yeah. For me, I see my whole music career in three spaces. And the first space is when I was a musician, and I had the pleasure of enjoying being a drummer, and later when I was in the Royal Artillery CMF band, picking up a trumpet. But those days of music, I guess, was a grounding for me personally, to understand from the side of a musician what it was all about. Over that period in my life, I can remember Alan Zavod. Who remembers Alan Zavod? Yeah, what a talent this guy was.
So Ray, how old were you?
How old was I?
Well, sort of.
Well, I guess I was around 16, 17, 18, around that time. I mention Alan because Alan was part of the Bay City Jazz Band back prior those days, and we played at places like 431 and Club and Keyboard and all those Optus and all those places. One particular reason for Alan was that we had a manager called Bob Phillips, who was the floor manager for IMT.
Oh, I love it.
Isn't he a nice guy? And a historian for television. But because Bob was the floor manager, we did 50 IMTs. And there was some great memories of those days of music and everything else that went down.
I remember Bob Phillips from Channel 9. I was a kid at the Tarak show, and he was our floor manager. So you met Bob Phillips. So Ray, then you moved into management or agency? Where did you go?
I got kicked out as a drummer, and Gary Young took over. So that wasn't so bad because Gary's a great drummer, so that was okay. So I was moved to being the manager. So that was really the start of the journey for me, and dealing with monopolies really in those days, because the guys that ran all the gigs, the dancers really had it sewn up, and bands didn't get paid very much in those days. So that was the journey for me, how it all started.
You're talking about monopolies. How did the venues have it sewn up? Did they just say, this is what you're going to get, that's it? Or did you have any bargaining power?
Not a lot of bargaining power. I mean, at 431, one band played all night, and we did 4 or 5 sets, I can't remember what it was. But the supply and demand factor, I think in those days the bands worked really hard, they always have. Later on, bands would be doing 4 or 5 gigs. I can imagine 4 gigs. Adrian, how many gigs a night would they do? 5 gigs, there you go. So 5 gigs a night. Now you can't even imagine that, but you start, lunchtime somewhere, and then you're doing 3 gigs, then you're finishing up with the Catcher at 3 o'clock in the morning. Who's been to the Catcher, by the way? Yeah, exactly. Graham Geddes, what a man he was.
Ray, I remember interviewing people for the archives, Barry Smith, Darryl Cotton, all of these gorgeous guys, going way back, even earlier, and them telling me that they did 4 gigs a night. And I thought that was ridiculous, because I knew that in the 80s, we could actually do 3 gigs in a day. We could do Saturday afternoon, Saturday early slot, late at the venue or somewhere like that. We could do 3 gigs. But these guys in the 60s actually used to do 4 and 5 gigs a night. Whoa. Yeah, we're talking about whoa. So who actually, at this stage, before the agency, who booked the gigs?
Well, when the Ramjo was running, it was just, for me, it was just contacting whoever to get it on board. I guess also, not forgetting those periods, they're sitting right in front of us is Gary Spry, and the AMBO in their day was magic. I mean, they were the powerhouse of that particular period. And your father, Jeff Joseph, was Jeff in there? Jeff?
Not your father, Peter McKenna.
Peter McKenna, yeah. So there was a lot of grounding done in those days by Ambo particularly, but then it sort of moved to another space.
Okay, so when did you start the idea of an agency with all these guys? It was the Australian Entertainment Exchange. Who and what made you form this company?
I was working at GoSet at the time. I think I was flogging advertising or something. I can't remember what it was, but Peter Raphael. There were three people in GoSet, and Peter Raphael was one of the founders and got me on board. And I had a great time in that period of time, as far as really getting into all the nuance that was happening. And particularly a dear friend called Terry Cleary, who I spent a lot of time with. Terry Cleary, who remembers Terry? Yeah, what a star that guy was, seriously. A really decent bloke. Okay,
can you please, I sound like, what's her name, Pauline Hanson. Please explain.
Please explain.
Can you explain the fabulous person you're talking about?
Well, I think the word star describes Terry. I mean, he was so different. Never got out of that t-shirt wherever he was, and was just a solid bloke.
So what do you mean? What do you mean a solid bloke? What made this guy Terry something different from anyone else?
His personality, he had smarts, and for me he was a bit of a mentor. So mentors in your life, doesn't matter where they come from, they're very important people, and this was a very particular point of my life where I was wanting to learn and be directed, and I was lucky. I had some great mentors.
So you started actually sometime playing with the Ram Jam big band. However, you became their manager, and at some stage you had the opportunity to form a company that was revolutionary. It was the beginning of the 70s. It was the revolution. Things had changed. How did you find yourself in a situation where you were going to form a company to revolutionise, I should say, rock music in Australia?
I guess for me personally, it was a matter of the timing. I was lucky to be in the right place at the right time. I was lucky to be able to partner with Peter in those days. Peter had Max Merritt and the Meteors, which was at their peak around that time.
How did you get them?
Well, we didn't get them. Peter managed them. So Max was one of the stable of artists that would form the AEE. So Billy Thorpe and the Aztecs, there was a whole series of acts at that period of time. And we were very lucky. Competition was competition, and you had to fight for your gigs, so you had to fight for everything.
Who was the competition?
Well, Ambo was still there, and then came along, there was Drum. Adrian, when was Drum?
Who was Ambo? Who's
that? It's sitting right in front of us.
Okay, so I want to know. People don't know. Who was Ambo?
Gary Spry!
Gary Spry, there he is there. Yeah.
Gary Spry.
Actually, let's give Gary a round of applause for Ambo. Seriously, it was one of those turning points.
So it was Gary Spry, Jeff Joseph, am I correct? So there was Ambo, Bill Joseph.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So we're getting some answers from the audience here. So Ambo was Gary Spry, Jeff Joseph, Peter McKennell, gorgeous, and Bill Joseph. Gorgeous. So then you're the competition, right?
Well, one of them, yeah. But
so you start up.
Yep.
What do you start up?
Well, we're just a regular booking agency, and there were a lot of gigs. Melbourne was the centre of music, and it had a lot of different venues and different things happening around the place, and that's why we were fortunate enough to be in the right place at the right time.
Of course, we're leading to Mushroom, meeting Michael Gudinski and Sunbury. So let's start with, you had these agencies, Ray, then you met Michael. How did this happen?
As I recall at the time, Peter Raphael, who's my partner in AEE, went off to London with Max Merritt, and basically that was the end of that partnership. And at the same time, Michael, who was with Michael Browning and Consolidated Rock, apparently that partnership split, and we joined forces. That's how it started.
And take us from there. Come on, there was this amazing sort of career, not career. You started Mushroom Records, correct?
Well, of course, I was a partner with Michael in Mushroom Records, and we started the label. I guess the catalyst was Sunbury Rock Festival, which came about, and we're fortunate enough to. Well, I actually got along with John Fowler very well. John Fowler was the organiser of Sunbury. He also worked at Channel 9, so there's a crossover from the days I was at Channel 9 with Bob Phillips and all that, and that sort of caught up with myself. So we were given the role of booking all the artists and being involved in that journey, which was a 3-year festival. And at the time, the first one, I remember everyone vividly, and I know a lot of people in the room were at Sunbury. And it was a turning point in the music scene, and it was part of the revolution of that particular era. Sex, drugs and rock and roll and everything went with it. It was all there.
But that was the truth. There was no alcohol license. Am I correct?
Well, there were gigs that were unlicensed and gigs that were licensed. I've got a lot of memories of alcohol. But anyway, I guess if we just look at what was going on around the late 60s, early 70s, we had a scene where we had so much progressive, original Australian music. We had stellar stars and acts. Daddy Cool, there's Spectrum and Chain, and it goes on and on and on. We had so much talent that wasn't being addressed. It wasn't getting airplay. There was a terrible situation with covers of overseas acts and everything else going on. So that's where Mushroom really put its foot in the right place. And in doing so, I mean, Michael was a very creative and he was a great R&A guy.
So how did you meet Michael?
Well, we met Michael, we were opposition and we sort of knew each other.
What do you mean, opposition?
Opposition agencies. So, we'd be chasing each other's jobs and pushing bands around and doing all the things we had to do.
How old were you?
I was probably about 20 and Michael was about 18, I suppose, a bit more like that, whatever it was. So it was a unique time.
That is actually quite, it's quite spunky to be chasing each other's ass at 18 and 20 years old, really.
Well, whatever, yeah.
Oh, really?
Well, things seemed to move pretty quickly. I mean, it was a progression around that time that when we got our partnership together, that partnership was solid at the beginning. It was really, really good. And I spent some fabulous years working with Michael, and I've always admired his talent. He's gone on, we all know where he is today and what's happened. But we rode out some difficult times together. It wasn't roses, I got to tell you. We had some tough stuff that we had to get through. And that's where.
That's okay. Shit happens.
Again and again.
Let's go past that. Let's go past that and work on, or let's talk about not that, but forming Frontier, or did Frontier or Premier come first?
Premier.
Premier. Where did you find Frank Stavallo?
Frank was working with Bill Joseph, and he was really loyal to Bill. I mean, Frank is the most loyalist guy in the world, and we all know Frank and what he's all about. He's another star in the Stella. But there was Jacobson, Chuck, myself, Michael, you know, it was at my house in Hopeton Road when we were there, and we spent a whole weekend talking to Frank about coming across to Premier.
You guys were young, am I correct?
Youngish, yes.
Youngish being what?
Well, they're various ages, but, you know, we were 20s.
You know, 20, 18, 22, 24. You're young guys, right?
Yeah, we're young guys. Yeah. So that particular time again was one of the turning points for the Mushroom Group as it started. The label, the publishing, the agency that went to Sam Riggy and Harbour in Sydney, and that started to grow there. And from that, I guess you couldn't do it in LA because it's illegal, but here we were able to put our hands on a lot of the activity that have to happen around the platform.
Yeah, but how did you get Frank?
A lot of trouble, I can tell
I
you.
always say that with great relish because I just love the name Frank. How did you get Frank Stavala?
A lot of effort. I think we wore him down. I think really when I think about it, the 2 days we spent talking to him about it again and again and again, we finally wore him down, so he finally came across.
Where did you find, I believe that Frank started out as an entrepreneur at about 16 years old. I lived in Moonee Ponds and he was running gigs in Essendon, and he's only a couple of years older or maybe the same age as me, and he was already running gigs. So where did Frank start?
Yeah, someone mentioned a bank. Yeah, Frank was a banker, yeah. I can't see him doing that personally, but anyway. So, yeah, you mentioned Frank was running gigs, Michael's running gigs. I was doing gigs before we got all this together. I guess it's in your blood. That's what you do. My most fortunate one that I was very fortunate to do was Daddy Cool at Melbourne Town Hall. And they went from nothing to #1 with Eagle Rock before we put the gig on. So, yeah, some fun memories.
Okay, so, yeah, good. So you got Frank on board, now you've got, I guess, the beginning of Premier Artists, yeah? But you and Michael went the next step and formed Mushroom Records. Can we talk about that?
Sure. Well, Mushroom was, and in Mushroom's journey, there's always some key people again. And Alan Healy from Festival Records was very close with Michael and was another catalyst that helped Mushroom go through the journey which we had to go through. So we had a helping hand, and that hand was very, very pivotal in the development of the label. And there was a lot of other support around what we were doing. And yeah, we were fortunate to be able to do that.
Okay, without putting a big emphasis on the fact that at one stage, of course, it was struggling, Skyhooks emerged, and all of a sudden, Skyhooks was your saviour, correct, Armando?
Sure, I mean, they came along at the right time. I mean, what do you say about Skyhooks? Living in the 70s, they were just pivotal, so much talent. There was one problem though, Michael forgot to renew their contract at the peak, and I was left because Michael couldn't deal with trying to talk about their record contract, and dealing with Ian McCaish and Red Simons when they're out of contract, I can tell you that was a journey in itself.
Is that another story, Ray?
Yeah.
That's another story.
It's a little story, I think it's probably a long story. Okay, so Skyhooks, you had Skyhooks happening. You also managed Renee Gayer. The most, I've got to say, I just grew up adoring Renee Gayer. But Ray actually lived in a house with Michael Gudinski, Molly Meldrum, Ray Evans, and Renee Gayer. Can I please hear something about what it was like living in that house?
Crazy. Yeah, it was a bit of a party house. A lot of stuff went down there. It was always different. And I guess what really happened was that I think Michael stayed there for 2 or 3 years, and Molly sort of came once and never left. Then Renee was there. And it was quite fiery at times, I can imagine that. And my saviour was that I met Judith, and Judith and I got married, and they all left.
Whenever you mention the names Michael Gudinski, Molly Meldrum, Renee Gare, leaving you right out of it, already you're just going, oh. Because they are the most amazingly sort of out there artists. Okay, Ray, Sunbury. I'm just going to throw that at you. Sunbury Festival, you, Michael, what happened?
Well, Sunbury was, as I said before, John Fowler was the organiser, and Bob Jones was the security, and there was Eric Robinson was the sound company. I mean, there was lots of people we all know working in that area. And I think Chug was the stage manager, and Molly was one of the compares, and it was all that. But what it really was a celebration of Australian music, and the coming together of, I can't remember what it was, first one, 30,000 people. The weather was perfect, the venue was great, the bands just kept pumping it out for 2 days.
How did you come up, or you and Michael, whoever it did, how did you even come up with the concept of doing this?
Well, we were blessed that we didn't have to worry about the organisation of the venue. We were actually the booking agency and the talent and all the things that went with that.
So who was running it?
John Fowler was the organiser.
This guy was not the owner of the farm. This guy was just an entrepreneur.
Exactly, yeah. He was a lighting guy at Channel 9, and he got the gig together. He got the farm and got it all to happen. And the first year was great for him. The second year, then there was a mud bath in the last year, and it all went to mud.
Actually, mentioning that, I'm going to refer to my partner, Paul, who actually worked at Channel 9.
Yeah.
And you know that your friend organised...
I knew John Fowler, and I knew he did that. And Peter Evans was involved as well, who was a...
So Paul, actually, my husband Paul Norton, worked at Channel 9 in audio.
When I was a kid.
And he was about 17 or 18.
I was 17 years old, yes.
17, and his mates organised Sunbury, am I correct?
No, John Fowler, the lighting guy.
John Fowler
and
Peter Evans, and they actually organised it and then went into discussions with Ray and Michael. Correct? Am I correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
John Fowler and Tom.
So we've got that sorted out.
Adrian Rawlings in Sunbury without
That's right.
Ray Evans. Ray Evans was the...
Someone just said Adrian Rawlins.
Sunbury work.
And
Gary.
no, it wasn't. I think it was Don. Adrian Rawlins was the most beautiful person that used to just go around to all the venues and be artistic. Am I correct?
Yep.
Do you know him, Ray?
Most certainly, yes. He was different.
Everyone was amazing. Ray, we're so honoured to have you here tonight. I really actually would like you to talk a little bit about your partner, Rod DeGrucci.
Yeah, Rodney, yeah. Let's hear it for Rodney. Rodney was a dear friend, and always enjoyed working with Rodney, and we were lucky enough to have a couple of clubs together, not big clubs, but Tramps, Ashley's, and the venue. And Smith Street was a very, very popular place in those days for us.
The venue was good.
Yeah. And yeah, Rodney, he moved to Bali, and I still saw him over the years, and then in the later years we saw him as well, Gary, remember? So,
Talk about skyhooks.
Skyhooks.
That changed everything for you, didn't it?
Of course, I think they changed the whole music scene. I mean, they were ahead of their self. They were, I mean, the biggest selling album, and it was a phenomenon. I mean, the way that they just took the whole scene over and worked through their period of time that they were together. Shirley and all that was just, it was a revolution.
That was the beginning of the 70s revolution. So Skyhooks not only changed everything, but it also really changed Mushroom Records, yeah?
Most certainly, yes. It was a very important turning point. Up until then, we were doing it tough. I mean, I remember if I didn't complete the Export Marketing Development Grant or take the manager out for another bloody lunch, it was in those days you had to take the manager out for lunch. It was tough. We really were building, but we're fortunate enough to have a lift.
So Skyhook saved your ass, yeah?
Could say that.
Well, let's just say that because in most of the historical sort of recollections, Skyhooks came along and actually really saved Mushroom. You guys were incredibly brave though. You signed up amazing artists who you believed in, Matter Lake, all these gorgeous, gorgeous bands. And it was really the beginning of a revolution. It was a new sound in music. It wasn't anymore just bands in Australia recording covers from overseas. It was an era where bands in Australia were actually creating their own music and creating their own sort of identity. And you and Michael actually really stuck with that and promoted Australian music. Ray, you and Michael, I don't know, do you want to, I don't know whether you ever want to say what happened with the end of Mushroom, whether you do or not, but you and Michael actually started Mushroom Records and Premier Artist, and you did an amazing job creating this fabulous empire. I would like you to just top it off the way you feel that it happened.
Okay, well there's a couple of things that came before Mushroom, and I guess for myself personally and Michael, I guess at the time, Evans Gadinsky was the forerunner of the Frontier and was the forerunner of a few areas. And for us, we were lucky enough, again I was fortunate enough to meet this guy called John Gunnell, who actually represented the Robert Stigwood organisation. And we were appointed through Evans Gadinsky to be their representative here. In a space of time we got to tour Eric Clapton, Frank Zappa, Cheech and Chong. There's a whole series of acts that we got to
Dave's not here!
Yeah, they're not here. And that was the forerunner, and then we're fortunate enough to break away from that and pick up John Mayall for a tour, which Michael was instrumental in. And that really was the start for us of consolidation going forward. So those days were very important to the journey as well. So a combination of management, a combination of venues, a combination of touring, and then that led on to the path of Mushroom.
Ladies and gentlemen, our frontier person, one of the people that actually led the drive in the 70s, revolutionised Australian music, revolutionised agencies, recording companies, and well, actually the whole scene, really. Would you please put your hands together for Mr. Ray?
Thank you.